What is up, everybody? I am Eric from the Knowledge Check, and I'm here to do another video for you all discussing a listener question submitted by Glen, one of our awesome patrons. And Glen wanted to know about beat structure and kind of crafting arcs that have really good buttons at the end of a session, kind of moving throughout a campaign. He also talked about how to maintain that narrative structure when the players go off the rails, for lack of a better way to put it. And I really like this question because it's something that a lot of dungeon masters have to deal with, myself included. Those of you that listen to our actual play podcast, Eberron Renewed, know that I really strive to give it that narrative, serial kind of feel of having that beat structure in each episode ending on just a place that makes narrative sense for the story to end at that point for a week before the next episode comes out. And the way that I do that is by looking at the narrative of my campaign differently than a lot of dungeon masters do. And I fall prey to the old way of thinking that I'm about to criticize somewhat. I fall prey to that fairly frequently. So I'm not coming from a place of saying, I have overcome this and you must do it too. It's just a helpful way of looking at the narrative of your campaign that will allow you to break everything down into arcs and then break them down into sessions and then break that down into beats. Because pulling the curtain back, those of you that don't know, on Eberron Renewed, we sit down and record a 3 to 4 hour session, and then I break those up into episodes. And I go into each session knowing where the episodes are going to land from time to time. So I really have to, in my pre-session planning, think about that and how the narrative is going to play out at the table. And I think the biggest mistake a lot of dungeon masters make is they look at their campaign through the meta narrative, which by that I mean they just look at it as the heroes must destroy the One Ring. They must defeat the Empire. They look at that really large meta narrative and they kind of lose themselves in the forest. They can't see the trees anymore because they're so focused on that overarching goal of the campaign. And what you have to do is take a step back away from the story that you're telling, and don't abandon the story. I'm not saying that. I don't mean throw it out the window. I mean, take a step back from it. Don't concern yourself with it when it comes time to play in the session, because especially if the campaign's been going for a while, your party's invested in it. They are wanting to resolve this narrative. And what you need to do is look at the session as its own story. Don't think about the meta narrative. Don't think about the fact that the party has to destroy the One Ring. Think about the thing that they are doing in that session. They're starting at point A. By the end of the session, they will be at point B. What is that story that you're telling? And that will solve a lot of the issues that I see dungeon masters deal with of having sessions that feel like they had no narrative meaning. They didn't further the plot. Because if you're looking at each session as its own story, as its own TV episode, as its own movie in a series, then that's going to eliminate that because you're going to structure your session to tell that narrative arc. So, example, instead of they must destroy the One Ring, they must escape the Nazgul. They must make their way through the forest to find Lothlorien. Instead of destroy the Empire, they must rescue the princess. They must rescue their best friend and the aforementioned princess who have been captured. They must perform a combat/social encounter to convince their father, who has fallen to the dark side, to redeem himself. If you look at the episodes that way, if you look at your sessions that way, then you can start to look at the narrative structure of your session as opposed to the narrative structure of your campaign. Because that's where people fall into, you're getting into trouble a lot of times, is they're thinking about the narrative structure of their campaign. And when you have a session that falls maybe in a valley of storytelling where you have high action and then calm down, high action, calm down. If you have a session that exists solely in that downward trend, you run the risk of allowing your party to feel like that session didn't matter. It didn't mean anything. Whereas some of my favorite sessions in the world are ones where no combat rolls are done. We never roll initiative. The very first episode of Eberron Renewed, no initiative was rolled. even though I asked for it a couple times because I was expecting them to get in a fight, and they're like, no. We're going to talk our way out of this. And so if you look and you know that this session is going to be in a downward trend, we're not dealing with the main narrative right now. There's no big action dealing with that. Then you can think, okay, what story can I tell down in this valley? Because the last thing you want to do is like, well, they're going to be in a valley, so I'm going to shoot it back up, because you want your overarching narrative to have those peaks and valleys, but you still need to be able to tell good stories when you're down in a valley like that. So yeah, we've gone over some examples of those stories that exist in a valley. The party trying to find their way through the forest to Lothlorien to gain rest, and that being a really big social encounter. And I think a lot of people miss out on the term social encounter because they should be treated like encounters. Granted, you don't need to roll initiative, but you should have an obstacle to the party, be present, and have a viewpoint that is antithetical to the party's desires. Whether it is a man of the law convinced that they are criminals and he must stop them, whether it's just a gatekeeper outside of a town saying, no, you can't come in, and allowing the party to come up with a plan and enact that plan through talking. This will give your more narrative based characters, your faces, a chance to really shine outside of telling the combatants to drop their weapons. Because that's another big issue, is either the face gets very little to do because it's a very combat focused campaign and they're just brought in when they're needed, but they're never allowed to have the agency to act where they can shine. And so if you start building social encounters for those valleys, or really character heavy moments like the downtime in a town, don't just skip over that. Don't just say you've had a week of downtime and now it's time for the next adventure. Allow your party to play that out. Allow them to go meet with their contacts, to go talk with them, to express concerns. Have the NPCs ready to express what's been going on while the party's been out of town. And what that will allow you to do if the players do engage with those NPCs is make those NPCs feel like real, genuine people that are a part of this story, or even a part of the party, because your party would presumably have NPC allies. And the last thing you want to do is allow those NPCs to just feel like quest boards. Like, oh, time to go on the next quest. Here's what I have for you. You want them to feel actualized and real. And so by allowing them to have these emotions, have these feelings, express them to the party, you're going to make your world seem richer. And I know I've kind of gone off on a tangent here, but it does relate back to it, of if you allow those valleys to have their own narrative arcs, because perhaps the quartermaster of your party who is at the hideout and helps them with supplies says, oh, I've got some healing potions for you all before you go out on the next mission. Well, if you explore that downtime, those valleys, and one of the party members goes and talks to this quartermaster, and there's like, I'm sorry, my potion supplier is missing. Like, I don't know what's going on. And then you don't have to make that a full-on quest, but the party goes and investigates. Maybe they've gone missing, but there's no real combat. Just they owed money to the wrong people, and now they're being shaken down. Something like that allows the party to still be active and engaged during the valleys when the main narrative isn't being thrust in their face. The other thing you need to keep in mind, though, and this is the second part of Glen's question, is what to do when you have these narrative arcs, these beats set into place, and the party doesn't do what you think they're going to do. The party decides to take a different path. And this can apply for both the valleys and the peaks. And I didn't really go over structuring narrative arcs for the peaks because I feel like that's a normal thing. You want to have those buttons of, I mean, just think back to TV, to movies. The moments when the big revelations happen, like, no, I am your father. That happens during a fight. And it's because your heroes are tired, they're laid bare, they're not focused on the social aspect of it. And so that's a prime point to have a big reveal. But also the valleys are good too because it's less expected. So just be sure, I would say have them either at the top where you're right at the peak, everything's at a fever pitch, the party's going, and then boom, big reveal. Or at the very bottom of the valley of like, okay, it's downtime. Oh my gosh, what just happened? And that'll kickstart that next upward swing to where they have this new information. They found this thing out that they have to now deal with. And I would say, like I said, I structure my sessions to be broken up into multiple episodes to be released in podcast form. You don't need to do that. You could just allow your session to have a singular arc that the party goes through. Or you can do what I do and what my players have to deal with, of little miniature arcs with those buttons. And what I typically try to do is it's a staircase. Like the start of the session, go up, 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 boom. First big narrative beat, little dip, up, 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 little dip, up, up, up. And that builds that tension to where once you finally hit the top of your narrative arc for the session, you should be at about 30 minutes left to play, maybe a little bit more. So then you can bring it back down. Because you don't want the narrative arcs to be unresolved unless every once in a while you want to do a cliffhanger. That's totally fine. Nobody would begrudge you that. And cliffhangers are great as long as they're not overdone. Let's just talk about Lost for a second. The cliffhangers lost a lot of meaning because they were used all the time. So, and I'm sorry if you all are hearing weird noise. Kylo, one of my dogs, is down below me chewing on his ball. So no big deal. It's just my pup. So yeah, you have these narrative arcs built. You have all the tools with you. On the Knowledge Check podcast, we talked about the DM spellbook. I'll probably do a video on it here on YouTube. But if you want to check it out, it's episode 7 of the Knowledge Check podcast, linked down in the description. And we go over what's called the DM spellbook, which is, I have it in a OneNote document, or it can be a notebook. You can take moment non-specific encounters. Like I have a warehouse fight, a bridge fight, things like that can be just plugged and inserted. And I also have things like monsters and NPCs and magical items that I can just plug and play. And what that allows me to do is when I'm building a session, I'm building those narrative arcs, I can plug everything in. And if the party goes off the rails, I don't railroad them. I don't say, no, this is the story. You're sticking with what you were doing, what I intended. Let's go. I allow the narrative to change around the non-specific tools that I've brought to this session. So an example would be going back to, we must destroy the One Ring. You have the party trying to get over the mountain pass, trying to progress on their quest. The whole party's assembled. It's time to get on the other side of these mountains so we can complete our quest. And the party gets up to the top of the mountain, and you had intended the structure was a skill challenge, and the threat was going to be they're going to freeze to death. You know, they have to make it to a certain point in the mountain where the storm is particularly bad. They have to make it through that. Then you're going to have some mountain men attack them, maybe an ambush and hiding. This is their favored terrain. They live in the mountains, so they're going to attack the party. The party are at a disadvantage because they don't know this area well. They're having to deal with the elements, all that kind of stuff. So it's a hard fight. And then maybe they get outnumbered by the mountain men. And so the last half of their trek across the mountain pass, they have to run. It's a chase sequence, which also brings some skills into it. But it's not the survival skill challenge. It's the run skill challenge. And then you had a nice little button right before they reached the end of the mountain pass. You had a Yeti, let's say, a big snow monster there to attack them. And it's a big boss fight. Cool. That's a good session. There's some danger. They're on a mountain, so things are crumbling. They might fall off. The skill challenges have real bite and real threat. The enemies can use the environment to their advantage to potentially knock them off the mountain or at least bury them in snow. And so that's a really good session. Then the party, once the skill challenge starts, says, it's really cold up here. Let's go under the mountain. Excuse me? So the whole session you had planned out is gone now. And so what you can do instead, if you have these non-specific tools at your disposal, is you just take them and move them under the mountain. Now, we're ignoring the fact that the mountain moment in Lord of the Rings was clearly Tolkien, the Dungeon Master, railroading the party into going in through Moria, which is where he really wanted them to go. But for our purposes, they decide to go under the mountain. So to give yourself some just mental time to prepare for the stark change in scenery that's coming, you have a puzzle. They have to figure out a puzzle door, and you're moving your notes around and reskinning everything, because that's the thing. All this stuff is non-specific. You didn't have Mountain Men monster cards made up with very specific powers based upon the fact that they are Mountain Men. You had just a 2-hit bonus, maybe a sack of hit points, damage type, damage amount. That's what you had. And so you can just cross out Mountain Men and put goblins. And now the party experiences the same set of tools you were going to use, but in a narrative environment that they chose. They chose to go under the mountain. You're not railroading them. You're just providing the same type of threats they would have experienced over the mountain. And obviously, this is different than if your party was particularly clever and did something that should allow them to avoid a fight. But that's not what we're talking about. It's like, let's go left instead of going right when you thought for sure they were going to go right. So yeah, you have them fight the goblins. And you're running behind now because you had to have the puzzle. So you skip that initial skill check. No, not a big deal. Skill check was just there because it was really cold. The snow was up to their waist. It was really tough, but that's not applicable here. So cross that out, throw it aside. The goblins attack them. They have a really awesome fight, but the goblins outnumber them. So now it's a chase sequence. And then they come to the big bad of the session, which, it doesn't really make sense to have it be a Yeti or a snow monster. So fire monster, because it's under a mountain and that's where lava lives. So yeah, that's how I structure my sessions with a narrative arc and still leave myself enough wiggle room to be able to allow the party to make decisions, to allow them to have the agency to drive the story forward while not driving myself crazy while having to plan a session literally on the fly. I have all the tools. I have my DM spellbook. All I need to do is apply them to any given situation the party is in. So yeah, I hope this has been helpful. I'm really liking doing these videos for you. Thank you so much, Glenn, for the question. And I have a few other questions from our patrons, so I will definitely be going through those as time goes forward. I want to give a huge thank you to all of our patrons. Your support is amazing, and we literally could not do this without you. The YouTube channel is a new thing because of your donations. And I would like to give a special shout out to our show sponsors, Daryl Delaney, Darren Katsko, Ryan Royce, Jessica Smith, Laura Pickren, Irene Villarito, Charles Compton, John Carey, and Nico Batson. Thank you all so much. And if you have questions, let me know down in the comment section. Sorry about my dogs. But thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you next time.